The story we are about to tell is one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in contemporary history. An event that not only changed the fate of a nation, but continues to provoke more questions than answers to this day. The assassination of the President John Fitzgerald Kennedy on November 22, 1963 in Dallas, Texas, was not merely a tragedy. It marked the beginning of a spiral of conspiracies, investigations, and theories that still haunt humanity.
Riley and Congressman Miller, Mr. Webb, Mr. Bell, scientists, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen.
Just days before his death, the President of the United States, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, was on what seemed to be a simple mission: to strengthen his image before the Southern electorate. He was driving through the streets of Dallas in a convertible car, accompanied by the First Lady and other public figures. The atmosphere was filled with expectations and optimism as he smiled and waved to the citizens. Nothing seemed to suggest the horror that was about to unfold. On that fateful day, as the motorcade advanced through the busy streets of Dallas, the president was about to make a turn, slowing down the vehicle. It was at that moment that the first shot echoed through the city. The president was struck in the back, and panic spread in seconds. Witnesses ran, screamed, but the sound of the tragedy was deafening. The president slumped forward, while his wife desperately tried to protect him, unaware of what was happening. The entire world stopped, and the question that immediately reverberated was, who really fired the shot? And above all, why? The reaction was immediate. The search for the shooter began within minutes, and soon the name of Lee Harvey Oswald emerged as the main suspect. He was quickly captured and interrogated by the FBI. However, what seemed to be the end of the story was merely the beginning of one of the greatest enigmas in history. With Oswald's arrest, the answer seemed clear. However, as investigations progressed, the evidence began to make the official version sound more and more distant from the truth. Something was profoundly wrong. The president's death should not have been surrounded by so many mysteries and secrets, and the pieces of the puzzle began to show that the official narrative was in contradiction with the facts. What did Oswald have to do with the assassination of such an influential man, someone whose decisions were shaping the fate of the world? A man with no history of extremism seemed to be a strange and disconnected piece in this story. How could a man so isolated, with no ties to powerful groups, be capable of executing something so devastating? Or, more importantly, was he really the one responsible? Doubts grew. And what if the truth was more complex than we imagined? What if Oswald had been manipulated by forces much larger, more powerful, and darker than any of us could have imagined? As evidence surfaced, the official story seemed to disintegrate, and the narrative of a lone gunman became increasingly implausible. Oswald's death at the hands of Jack Ruby, a man with mysterious ties to organized crime, only fueled the fire of conspiracy theories. Ruby was arrested shortly after killing Oswald, but before he could reveal what he knew, he died of cancer a few months later. Ruby's silence, along with Oswald's death, left the nation with countless questions and an alarming lack of answers. The scenario seemed meticulously orchestrated to ensure the mystery was never solved, for the pieces of this enigma would never fit together completely. But what happened in Dallas was only part of a much deeper plot. In his final years, John Kennedy had defied the powerful forces that controlled the United States. His refusal to support the invasion of Cuba, his stance against covert operations, and his resistance to military escalation in the Caribbean had created enemies within his own nation. People inside the government, intelligence agencies, and the military began to view him as a threat. A clear example of this was his rejection of Operation Northwoods, a CIA proposal to create a false flag operation against Cuba in order to justify war. By rejecting this operation, the president made enemies within the intelligence agency, which later became one of the primary suspects in orchestrating his death. Additionally, the president had an even more powerful and silent enemy, the Mafia. Throughout his presidency, both he and his brother, Robert Kennedy, aggressively attacked organized crime. The American Mafia had significant interest in Cuba and its relationship with Fidel Castro, and the president's policies threatened those interests. It was a direct and deadly conflict between two worlds, official politics and the criminal underworld. What if the truth was that the assassination was a conspiracy involving not only politicians, but also the Mafia, CIA agents, and even greater hidden powers? The idea that these groups united to bring down the president in a coordinated operation became increasingly plausible. And the president's assassination could be seen as a strategic move to restore the balance of power in favor of those who control the behind-the-scenes operations. There were still more doubts about what really happened in Dallas. The official version claimed that Oswald was the sole gunman, but many investigations pointed to the possibility that more than one person may have been involved. In 1976, the House Select Committee on Assassinations suggested there was more than one gunman, which further fueled the theory of a large-scale conspiracy. And if that wasn't enough, new reports and evidence began to suggest there was a third shooter, someone positioned in a location that seemed impossible for Oswald. The mystery of the president's assassination cannot be seen as just any ordinary murder. It involves deeper issues of power, information manipulation, and control over history. The truth, hidden in the shadows of politics, has never been fully revealed. And to this day, many CIA files related to the case remain classified, leaving more questions than answers. The president's assassination marked the beginning of an era of widespread distrust. Fear took over the nation. What happened that day transformed the public's perception of the government's ability to protect its citizens and be transparent with them. The assassination became a symbol of an era in which truth seemed to be constantly manipulated. An event in which the official narrative was questioned, and the public began to ask, what if we've been manipulated all along? Over the decades, conspiracy theories have only grown. Contradictory witnesses, new evidence, and the covert actions of key figures have turned the case into an endless story. As the years passed, the questions never ceased, and the assassination of the president continued to resonate as a painful lesson of how truth can be manipulated by the most powerful forces, and how, often, we fail to see what is right before our eyes. Thus, the question continues to echo. Who was really behind the president's death? And why do the answers remain hidden, even after so many decades of investigation? This is a mystery that seems to have no end. And, to this day, the story of November 22nd, 1963 remains an unsolved enigma. The assassination is not merely a chapter in American history. It is a story of manipulation, power, and mystery that will continue to haunt us for generations.